there it goes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess let's get started. So as you mentioned, we're doing the recursive FS deep dive today. So I put together like a rough agenda, but feel free to suggest other topics. I thought to start with, we could just basically the two things that we've done already on this front is MakeDerp and Rimraf. So I thought might be good to just start with those and kind of like, you know, summarize how that went and any lessons that we learned along the way. There definitely were some. So yeah, does anyone have anything they want to start with?
Rimraf was interesting for me because it definitely felt like it taught me that like we shouldn't have just done experimental in docs. We probably should have had a loud warning in our command line. And I know we did do that for fs.promises. And I think probably without having that warning, we probably have more adoption than we would like, given we're changing some of the functionality. So I think we really need to be diligent to call out that things are experimental.
Yeah, agreed. And that was just kind of an oversight, it sounds like, with Rimraf, but definitely a good thing to do going forward.
Yeah, and I even think like we've been guilty. I think I've definitely been guilty where like I've called it experimental in docs, but not like had a loud warning. I did that with coverage, which has turned out to not be a problem, but we just got bitten with Rimraf is what it turns out.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what else. There was a lot of contention around the naming and like where to put that functionality, which I think we kind of ended up with, in my opinion, a not great compromise. That's something that I have on the list here to talk about maybe later too, is like going forward, do we want to be using the recursive flag? Or is there some other pattern we should be following? Anything else on the Rimraf front?
A meta thing for me is that when I kind of dove in and started looking at some, and I only spent an hour doing it, but I basically did a quick literature review of some other platforms, and it kind of jumped out that we probably could have done a better, like have something resembling a design document earlier on, where we had justification from here's why we are different than other platforms, at least justify the reasons why we're different than other platforms if we're going to be different than other platforms, or maybe we shouldn't be different than other platforms in a case like this where it seems like a feature that's pretty common.
Right.
So,
yeah, I definitely think researching that stuff ahead of time, yeah, probably smart. What about you worked on MakeDerp, right? Was there anything there that is noteworthy?
I just went a lot smoother, I think. Like I think it's a less contentious feature because like Rimraf turned out to have these magic little things it does, like retrying on errors, and Rimraf can be easily parallelized, so it's like an innately parallel operation, whereas that's not really a problem for MakeDerp because the directory below has to have been created before the directory above it's created, so you end up doing stuff linearly. So it's just a much less complicated feature. And I think there's less question of what its behavior would be than Rimraf. So I don't know. Yeah. I also don't think we loudly warned. So I think we made the same mistake where we didn't loudly warn that it was experimental.
But maybe that one didn't need to be. Like I think going forward too, we're going to have like similar situations where, you know, some of these features are maybe more contentious or it's not immediately clear like how they work or where the functionality should go, but probably some of them are pretty straightforward, like MakeDerp.
I think that's a fair point. Like, does everything have to be spend a year being experimental? And I don't think that should be the goal. Like, or else the platform is going to take 5 years to get any new API calls, right?
Okay.
So like what is the what's the reason to throw things into experimental, or is it just the tendency to throw things there just for safety-ish reasons? Is that it?
I feel like the things get put there because we're not really confident in essentially we're not confident that it's going to work for people. And I think that's what happened with Render, where it had the behavior it had, and then sometime much later people started picking it up and saying, well, this doesn't really work like I expect it to. And I think it was the right call to put that in experimental. I think, but yeah, that's from what I can see, we want to put things in experimental because we're just not like confident this is the way it should look and this is the behavior it should have. I guess I'm also interested in like, what about vendoring stuff? Like, how did that go? Is that something we want to do again?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting decision. We definitely I made like the same PR 3 times before that got merged, where initially I inlined it kind of like we did end up doing. And then someone was like, oh, you should vendor that. So then I did that. And then someone else made a PR that was like, no, I just imported the whole thing. And then everyone approved that. So that was definitely a bit of a frustrating experience. But I do kind of wish that we had just gone with the maybe like the properly vendored approach. Because now we'll never get any like bug fixes or anything from Rimraf directly. And there actually have been a couple like patch releases that Isaac has done since Rimraf 3.0. So we should actually maybe look at what those are and whether or not we want to import them.
It's interesting. It's an interesting point. And now we've kind of written a layer on top of Rimraf anyways with your PR. So it's almost like we want a vendor, but then we also want a shim on top of it that, like, instead of just requiring it, like maybe there's like a compatibility layer or something.
Right.
I think that it's good that we vendored that I think it's good that we, even if it was just a copy paste into the FS folder, I think it's good that we did use an existing library, because I think we would have spent 5 years debugging things that have been debugged in Rimraf already for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I saw your comment on my PR where you suggested I make a note that I'm going to refactor Rimraf one day, which I'm not super crazy about doing. But because I mean, yeah, from working on it a few times, like that code is super confusing the way that it works. Like, I don't know. I mean, it would be great to maybe rewrite it in a more straightforward way because it was written a long time ago. It uses like tons of callbacks and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so there, like you said, there are so many little things in there from like, how does this work on like Solaris or whatever, that I really, I don't know how to test that. I don't really want to touch that. Okay, so
not everything is like that though. It's like make derp is not going to be that bad, but I think it's fair to say then it's not something we want to like explicitly avoid, and it's not something we always want to do. It's just, it should be an option if we need to reach for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think like one of my pet things that I think we're talking about a little later today is CopyRecursive, and I feel like that's going to have a lot of the same little caveats to it.
Yeah, I agree. I guess actually, why don't maybe we like segue into that now? So the next on the agenda was, maybe just let's put some thought into what are some other FS APIs that we could make recursive, or entirely new things like CopyDir, which doesn't exist at all. Actually, maybe we could start to. I know Darcy, you tried. Was it chown or Chmod that you were trying to do?
Yeah, that was primarily the only session that I got any time to even look at that was with when I paired with Ben, and Ben was essentially the one to kick that off. And I think it still has a branch open for that.
Which function was that though?
It was for, I think it was Chmod is what we were looking at.
Okay.
Even though I think the original issue that's open is for chown. but
Okay.
I've been following along and being like, I think just doing a whole pass at these recursive functions, like it just somebody needs to take time and just be like, I think this could easily be like one foul swoop, do a bunch of these recursively.
This is that time, my friend. What do you remember? I remember you guys ran into some issues with Chmod. I don't remember exactly what they were though. Something around like security or something.
I think it's time to, Isaac was the one that brought up like a concern about, what was it, time to, I forget the issue exactly. Can go find the actual comment.
I mean, that's definitely something to be aware of going forward with these things. There's definitely like, I think security is a concern. Making things recursive in a way that's like, doesn't have any like timing issues is potentially tricky. And then some of them, I think the work has to happen in like libuv, which further complicates things. Okay, so we had chmod and chown are some that we've kind of already identified. Anyone have other ideas for FS APIs that could be made recursive?
So one that comes to mind is Watch, and Watch already has the recursive option. However, it's not supported on Linux. So, I mean, there are some technical reasons for that. It's my understanding that it would be quite the hassle to make that work with the implementation that's used for Linux, which is iNotify. But if something could be manually done to work around that and make the API more consistent, even if it's not the most efficient, then that might be an appropriate course of action there. I don't know if we really call that in scope here, though, because it does have the recursive option. It's just not always supported.
Yeah, but I think that has come up in meetings in the past, where like that's one of the things I think that we've identified as like a not great experience for developers to not have like that there is that functionality built into the platform, but it's kind of buggy and sketchy, and so people use like Watchman or other tools like that.
I mean, I think for that one, I mean, if you want that behavior, then you pull in a userland module. And it seems to me it's another situation where we could be like, well, maybe we should just vendor that module.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that may absolutely be the case specifically for that one, because if there's an implementation that's providing the recursive functionality, which is already like documented, just not available on some platforms, then that functionality should be backfilled in through vendoring or whatever else.
I would love to, kind of a meta thing, I'd love for us to think about customer use cases for, or like user stories for some of these things. Like, I think part of why Chmod and Chmod maybe lost some momentum was that it wasn't as immediately obvious that 1 million people would use it. But maybe there's some major stakeholders who would. Like, I think NPM maybe uses some of this functionality. I would assume when it's dumping stuff to disk. So would be interesting. Yeah.
They were one of the people that was interested in whether it was chown or chmod, right?
I definitely like the idea of doing it in like a holistic way where we like look at the whole, you just kind of line up the file system API and be like, okay, which of these methods need it?
Yeah, so I was trying to find, I had started a list, like a huge list after our call, Ben, and then I can't seem to find it. Yeah. I started to go through all these and then look at, I think it was like, I forget who mentioned it, but like, it might have been Chris that was like, there's a whole bunch of prior art with like POSIX and like what we would want to, however you like pronounce it, POSIX, and like which APIs we would want to mimic versus what do we already have that we could essentially add recursive to.
We could explicitly, like, just to play devil's advocate, like we could have an anti-goal and say we're not going to move all of the FS operations over. We're fine with targeting these ones that we know are super impactful for users, like Rimraf, McDirt, CopyRecursive. Maybe like it sounds like Ryan has a really real use case for Watch, but like maybe we don't need to for file system operation X that people use rarely, right?
I mean, I definitely think, if we had a list of candidates, I think we would probably prioritize them by, sort of the impact they could have or how widely used they are.
Well, certainly some of them are just not in scope entirely because they specifically relate to files and wouldn't make any sense recursively. Things like read.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other examples they can think of something we might want to look at?
So on the topic of read again is readdir. I'm not sure what that would look like if done recursively, or if that would make enough sense for folks, or even if it would be useful. But if I'm thinking of a recursive reading of a directory, it reminds me of the tree command on Unixes.
So that would like recursively return every like file contents to you?
Not necessarily the contents, but if one of the entries is a directory, that could open up to an array that has those entries in it, that sort of thing. Some kind of data structure where that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
again, not sure I'm sold on this one, but it's one of the things that, because we're operating on directories, it makes sense to think about it in terms of recursion.
Yeah, I mean, I could see some value in that for sure. Any other ideas?
And more obscure ones like U times. But yeah, like copy file is going to be a big one, I think.
Yeah, so let's maybe talk about that. I have that under like, entirely new things. Maybe like CopyDir or CopyTree or something.
My colleague at Google asked specifically for this, and I think it would just be really impactful, just like the two we've done so far.
I do agree. This would be, I think, it seems like a pretty obvious one, and it does seem like it would be pretty impactful. I think there are some complications with it. Like, I'm not sure if you could implement that entirely in the JavaScript layer, or if it would need some underlying support. And then also, I just think like it is gonna be a bit contentious. Like, what do we call it? Does it belong under FS, or should it go in utils, or some things like that? But I agree, it's a valuable one.
Another one, sorry, another one that is useful is just like this is to rename. We don't want rename. We want, like, I don't know. Does rename allow you to like just move a directory? I don't even know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You're asking for move, basically.
Yeah, move. Which I mean, that's what it will do, right? It essentially takes two paths and it renames one path to another path, which can imply movement. I just don't know if it works on directories.
Yeah, my understanding is that it does, but my understanding could be flawed.
Let's try it out. Should only take a second.
What do other people think about like CopyDir, CopyTree? Any concerns there, or?
I think that one of the biggest concerns I would have with that is what happens in the case of various forms of links. That could be handled with options, as the CP command on Unix is, but it would be something that we need to take into account. But I believe that our existing APIs for copy file and such will also take such options anyway. So it seems like that may be a solved problem.
This kind of gets back to that point, Brian, gets back to Isaac's concern with Chmod, and I think probably Chon too, which is it's the problems around links, Simlinks. Because you have to do two system operations to check to see if it is a symlink or folder or file, and then perform an operation to change its settings. An attacker, because those are two atomic operations, an attacker could actually get an operation in between that switches it out with a symlink. And now you've recursed out of the folder you were trying to recursively change the permissions on out to a folder that's somewhere else on the system, and you've changed the permissions elsewhere. So that was the attack that Isaac was bringing up. But we should have that in mind for like anything that's recursive, really. Yeah.
I guess sort of a question there is, how is it dealt with in existing commands, like in Bash and whatnot? Or is it just simply not dealt with, or is it not a concern there?
That's a great question. And that could maybe that should really inform our design for how we approach the rest of this work, maybe. How is it approached in our current Rimraf implementation? Because it feels like it's susceptible to it, right?
Yeah, I definitely think security is a big concern for some of these, which maybe part of the planning of this too is to have someone that we can, run these things by for those kinds of concerns. I don't know I'm sure there is like a node security team, but I'm not sure if that's the kind of thing they do.
If I was doing this at work, I would probably be asking someone on the security team to do a pen test on any of this new stuff. Like, we should see if we can find out an equivalent.
I think Chris poked the node security working group in one of the threads about this specifically. I can try to find where that was and who essentially was referenced.
Yeah, I don't recall anybody actually responding, so maybe we need to reach out to someone.
I mean, the other thing here.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Marcin has been doing some like kind of security proposals at the OpenJS level, and was working on the new Security Alliance Foundation thing. And we've talked about having like a security kind of working group at the foundation level. I wonder if we could, if there are people there as well that might be able to run stuff by.
Mhm.
Yeah, that could be a good resource.
So there are also some external folks in academia who are doing security research with respect to Node. One name that comes to mind is my former colleague, Dan Stefan at UC San Diego. I will send him a ping about this particular problem.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Kind of a meta, well, maybe I should add this as a new agenda item and not derail. I think a lot of these things, I'm going to derail. I think a lot of these things for me speak to like having a bit of an RFC or a design document that says, here's our plan for where we want to get the file system to in the next year or something. Because then we could vet the plan to a certain degree before we start really diving in on each.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, especially when, I mean, you mentioned a few things here, like identifying use cases for the feature. You know, we just talked about security kind of reviews. So yeah, maybe that is good. And maybe we could sort of, you know, rather than putting up a PR and then getting feedback about the API, maybe we could get some of that accomplished up front before anyone starts writing code. So yeah, I'm definitely in favor of the RFC idea, especially for the possibly more complicated or contentious ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's close to what we did actually for Chris's command line feature, because we did have a couple working sessions where we kind of hashed out the features a bit.
No, that's true, and that seemed to work pretty well. So, okay, anything else for CopyDir, CopyTree? Is someone going to suggest putting this in like copy file with a recursive flag? Probably.
I hope not. I think that one we'll be able to look at more other platforms and see. I think this does exist on a lot of other languages. I think this does exist in a lot of other languages, and I think it tends to exist as a different operation. I get it.
It's definitely that way in Python.
Yeah, they have it's a CopyTree or something, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of that being a separate method as well. Can anyone speak to the idea of whether or not this could happen in JS land, or would it have to be something in like libuv?
I'm not sure why it couldn't happen in JS.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really sure. Like, how is recursive copying implemented? Like at the system level, is it literally just a bunch of calls to copy, or is there some other magic that happens there?
Pretty sure, but I don't know for certain. I imagine it's just a whole lot of system calls
To copy. Yeah, okay. Oh, who posted that link?
That was me. I'm just skimming it, but I think there might be some system level calls for copying a range of files.
Yeah, I mean that would definitely be something to look into there. Obviously, if we need to make changes in something like libuv, that complicates things. My C++ is definitely rusty.
I'm trying to look here why this was closed. Was it actually implemented?
Yeah, I mean, if it already exists, that's great. But then if it was implemented, why isn't it in Node? Does anyone have anything else for kind of new candidates for making recursive, or should we move on? I'm just looking at the agenda here to see what's next. We did kind of talk about some of these things. Security, we discussed. POSIX compatibility. I believe the existing like FS API is intended to kind of mirror POSIX, right?
For better or worse, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's kind of the question there, right? Is like, how strictly do we want to adhere to that?
Well, I mean, we've already broken the rules, right? Because of these recursive operations. It's no longer like a one-to-one syscall.
Right. Yeah, okay, I remember that. That was part of the discussion with Rimraf and around like, should this go in the FS module?
I think it's user hostile to expect a user to, if you're coming from Windows, as an example, and you have a completely different mental model of the system, you still have a mental model of the file system and operations on the file system, copying a file, deleting a file, what have you, but you don't necessarily have a mental model of how Unix approaches that. So it feels a little user hostile to move anything that's not POSIX into a different place that the user now needs to find. It's like,
yeah,
so it feels weird, yeah.
For terms of like comparison, I think the way Rust handles stuff like this is like there's a high level API which may or may not work, and then there are low level APIs like that are platform specific. So like you'll have like one thing to just like do some file system operation, and then if you know you're running on Unix or whatever, you can use that low level implementation. And then there's, if you know you're on Windows, you can use the Windows implementation, which probably doesn't exist. But that's kind of like a way in which Rust handles this problem. Whether that's suitable for Node or not is, I don't know. I don't know the decisions there, but.
That was, I think, with the initial Rimraf attempt, I think that was like, I was resistant to putting it in FS because it does kind of break with that POSIX compatibility. And so we initially wanted to put it in a different module, but that was met with a lot of resistance. But I agree, I do still kind of favor that approach. I just don't know if it's going to happen.
One thing kind of similar to that, like, is I've been reading through Dino's API recently, just as a like, if you could have done this over, what are some of the decisions Ryan would have made? Out of curiosity. And they have some methods like fs.read text file, which is like, without telling me that it's UTF-8 encoding or doing any of the shenanigans you have to do to get a text file in Node. It's literally just a slightly higher level abstraction that gives you a text file instead of a file handler or whatever, which I thought was kind of cool. And that's in the same namespace as like read file. It's just a slightly higher level abstraction than read file.
Right. I think we'll have a lot more luck not creating a new top level module. But I think as long as we're okay with mixing non-POSIX compliant things into the FS module, then that's probably fine.
I think for Rimraf, I came around. We'll see how this all lands, but I kind of did come around to that argument that it was doing too much. So I don't really, like, frankly, I don't know all of the POSIX commands, or do I know when we're compliant and not compliant? But the argument that I should be able to capture errors, I should be able to kind of observe this thing if it is doing something that is in an error state. That kind of won me over. I was like, well, yeah, it is kind of, we're suppressing errors whether you want us to or not. And that to me maybe feels like it shouldn't be on one of the lower level file system operations, and you should opt into it with a function that sounds like it's going to do more, like calling copy directory. It just sounds like it's, you know, the method name sounds like it's going to be doing a little more work for me, basically, which
Yeah, which is, I mean, part of the reason, yeah, I favor that being a new method. Even Rimraf, like if we had implemented Rimraf as like fs.rimraf or something, then I think we wouldn't be considering changing some of its behavior around being able to like delete a file, for example.
No, I agree, and I think that we might even want to make this behavior stricter on Rimraf and introduce an fs.rimraf or fs.rm or something.
Right. What else do we have on the agenda here? We have kind of covered everything, I guess. Yeah, anyone have anything else?
So Joe, who I work with, is in this meeting and he wanted to join and get involved. So let's give him something to do.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I wasn't sure if we were at that point yet, but if I unfortunately I've been kind of doing stuff, so I haven't been able to take my own notes. But I'm going to look back at the notes there, and if there's something that you think would make sense to start focusing on, I'd be happy to take a look.
Sure. Yeah. That sounds great. Maybe even just this like initial like looking at the existing FS API and identifying some like candidates. You know, that'd be useful. I'd also like to start maybe planning or doing some sort of like an RFC type process for something like CopyDir.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, in terms of like the things from this list, I definitely think in terms of impact, like that would be a pretty logical next one of these things to try and implement.
Okay. Cool, I can start looking at that.
That was one too, like I've definitely been interested in the whole CopyDir thing and in possibly implementing that. So yeah, let me know if you start working on that. I'd really like to as well.
Okay, yeah, I mean, happy to you know, partner on that in whatever way makes sense, RFC and implementation and everything.
Yeah, sure, that sounds great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ethan, are you a collaborator?
Who, me?
Yes, you.
No.
I think after this PR you have lands, maybe we should nominate.
Ben, I think, suggested the same thing.
Okay.
It's getting a little inconvenient at this point.
Yeah, we need more collaborators.
Yeah, well, yeah, like I think Ian's been contributing to this working group since pretty much day one. So I would make a case for Ian without this PR landing, but I think it just makes the case a little easier where we can say like, Ian helped see this feature over the finish line. By the way, he's been involved with this working group from day one.
That's been like 2 years now since we started this. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of that.
Action item. Let's write down some action items.
Sure, yeah.
We were doing a good job before society collapsed of like occasionally having meetings where we set out a roadmap for ourselves, and I really liked how that did bubble into like a few working sessions on the command line parsing stuff that Chris just delivered a PR on. I think just formalizing this process of having a little bit of a roadmap for the group and then emitting some RFCs out of that, I think would be great. And I think that kind of seems like a good starting point to really kick the file system work we're doing into motion again, like we were talking about on this call. So I guess action item, having another meeting at some point not in the not too distant future to reevaluate roadmap, but also, like we were saying with Joe, maybe starting with an RFC process for some of this other stuff.
Yeah. So are you meaning like do that during this time slot, or like with the, I know with the ARG parser, you guys had like a few sort of out of band meetings.
Is Chris still on the call? I don't want to do all the talking.
I'm still here. Yeah.
So I'm just one opinion. I kind of like the out of band meetings because you get like a slightly smaller subgroup who are really interested in that one specific thing, and it's hard to build things with a giant group of people. But for the roadmap, I actually like the large groups of people. So I don't know. I'm open.
I agree with Ben.
Yeah, we could definitely do both.
Yep.
Yeah, I think meeting every other week too, if we had some out of band meetings, you know, there's more progress to be had for sure. And it would be good for me to kind of ramp up on some of the work that y'all are looking at.
And this time is on our off weeks is a good choice probably for when to schedule those.
True, yeah.
Works for me.
And I don't know if it's worth talking about. Well, I might as well talk about it on this call. Like I think the other thing Chris and I had kicked around a tiny bit is like, we're not a working group. We're just a group of interested parties, some of whom wish to be collaborators, or some of whom are collaborators, but we don't really have like any official standing on the Node project. Like, and Chris and I were discussing whether that's something we should be trying to achieve. Like if we do start delivering these RFCs and we do have a bit of a roadmap, like is there a little bit more of a charter we would have around that? Is that something we should be considering?
I know that's come up in the past. There were, I mean, I think I'm in favor of it. I know there's some like additional stuff that goes with being like a chartered working group. And I think one of the things we mentioned at the time was we actually, like, even though we're not officially a group, like people will like ping Node tooling on PRs and things like that that are contentious. So I think at the time we were like, oh, I think we're getting maybe enough value not being a charter working group. But yeah, maybe it's time to revisit that. I don't remember exactly like all the things that go along with that.
What's like the cost benefit analysis? Like what would we gain from being?
I think
chartered?
That was the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, do all this other stuff to be a chartered group. We're already getting like pulled into these kinds of discussions, and people seem interested in what we have to say. So yeah, what is that?
I think on my mind is with Chris's pull request to argument parsing. I kind of wish that we would have been in a position to reach consensus inside of our working group without having to go to the TSC. And I don't even know if that's something that can happen in a chartered group. I don't understand how the process works.
It is.
Yeah.
You know, the TSC, like, essentially it either will or can empower working groups to have the final say on their little area. So but I don't really know how that would look for us since it's kind of, it's not like we have there's just a lot of things that tooling touches, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
but I think it's worth discussing with the TSC for sure, and like starting that conversation.
Does someone want to take that on as an action item to, I mean, at least look into like what would we have to do to get that process happening?
I can share a little bit of what has happened with the package maintenance working group doing this, if that would help. I mean, it's really not much. Well, okay, you have to write a charter and you have to have a clear reason. Ours was because of the work we were doing in the PKG.js org, and we needed, in order to have that under the Node, you know, umbrella, we needed some, you know, official ownership of it. So So we just had to like lay out that doc and then add the proposal for the TSC to discuss. It's really that simple. And I think, but I think tooling is probably too broad. Like tooling as just a general concept is too broad, would be my guess, right? So like when we did that with the package maintenance group, it was specifically for the goals of these, that org. We're talking about maybe doing it for the web server frameworks, which is morphing a little bit into taking ownership of all of HTTP. And if we were to go that route, which it sounds like we will at some point, we would probably seek charter there as well. But again, those are like, there were very two clear reasons why you choose that. And so putting together the document, I mean, I think Michael just copied and pasted another one and changed some of the terms or whatever. So it's not like it's like time consuming or anything, but we definitely had a ton of discussions around what is the charter cover and why.
Yeah,
I wonder if we, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the charter, isn't some daunting document either for like, where it can be in other places. It's just like a paragraph or two that's in the working groups document.
I was kind of wondering, like, if we delivered something resembling a roadmap, maybe that could be a way to make our purview less broad, where the things that we have some technical say on have already been brought to the TSC in the form of a roadmap. So there's not surprises.
Yeah, maybe illustrating that more with like specific examples versus just describing it would help with that process. I was also going to suggest, Wes, I think you mentioned like Michael Dawson. Maybe it might be good to, maybe he'd be a good person to talk to about this idea first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's like worked on a bunch of these charters for different groups. So
Michael has his hand in everything. He's usually a good person to talk to about something.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone want to take that on as an action item? Even just to get things started.
I mean, I can do that. I do want to say that we should temper our expectations, but I will definitely reach out about it. And I think Wes is right that it's going to be very difficult to find that scope. And I think further, it's just, I don't know. For the TSC to essentially delegate decisions to a group, it needs to be able to trust that group, right? And I'm not sure like what needs to happen for the TSC to trust that we're not going to do things that are going to be horrible. And I don't know like what that looks like or how the TSC feels about it right now.
For what it's worth, I think also the charters I've looked at all say if there's a disagreement that needs to raise to the TSC, that's still like valid end state. So like if the team is doing something bad and some other collaborator says, hey, look, I don't think they're doing the right things, like they could just raise that to the TSC. So I don't think it like cuts out the TSC process, but it just means that not everything has to go that far.
And is it correct that chartered groups have like a TSC champion or liaison or some person who is a part of that group as well? I'm not sure.
I think it does, and I think Michael did that on our behalf, maybe for package maintenance. To be honest, yeah, that would be a great question for Michael. He would definitely know.
Yeah, I think I think it's worth at least maybe having a conversation with him as a starting point to see if this is worth pursuing. I think one good thing, we did kind of say that up until now we've been pretty happy with not being a chartered group. So I think if it turns out that wasn't possible or whatever, I don't think that would be a big hit to the group. Like I would also be happy to continue on in the capacity that we have been. So, but yeah, worth a talk, I think.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think there might be some benefit in formalizing our relationship with the TSC at least. And I think that like we kind of like we went back and forth when we were talking early on in this group about like whether our goal was to actually have something resembling a roadmap and things we would implement versus just putting interesting ideas out that anyone could pick up. The reality really has been that we've done a lot of work with amongst ourselves, and I think it's actually working pretty well. So this puts it on my mind too, because I think we are a group that's producing work.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of it. Let's get the conversation started anyways.
All right, I'll take that.
Okay, yeah, I put your name next to it there. Does anyone have any last minute stuff? We've got 4 minutes left. No, if not, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, all y'all go into my PR and approve it or something, or give it a thumbs up and shit, because it really helps to have
Links are, it didn't happen.
more thumbs ups.
You're talking about the arg parsing, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. It seemed like it was going really well, and then it got a little contentious there.
I also yesterday put up a PR for some changes to Rimraf, and I did ping the group on it. So yeah, I would also appreciate any feedback or support there.
Rate, like, and subscribe.
Yes.
All open PRs.
Or Darcy,
Awesome.
repeat something?
No, I just said links or it didn't happen.
No.
But yes, great work, both of you guys.
Okay. Yeah, let's leave it at that. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.